Hey everyone, TrueDiltom, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome here. Today I wanted to make a video on a common talking point made on the mainstream right of today that originated with the late Andrew Breitbart, that being this mantra of politics is downstream from culture. This is something that I've heard Gavin McInnes say, Steven Crowder, and just all of the big names in the mainstream conservative movement today. They have all said it verbatim, but instead, culture is downstream from politics. This isn't to say that we are incapable of making any cultural changes as humans, of course not. The very institutions that comprise the political process are obviously filled with humans. It's simply to say that the cultural climate, the values and beliefs that give rise to political ideologies are the product of interactions between power structures, and under liberal democracies, they select for leftism. Now, conservatives, the defenders of the Anglo-American liberal democracy, are probably the only group that doesn't see the Western democratic system as an ingenious construction of Orwellian engineering. Now, some might say, well, what about the left? Isn't their whole issue with the West that it simply is not liberal enough? Well, perhaps the moderate types, maybe the herds of voters might think this, or maybe their goal is something that they see as transcending liberalism. But either way, the left-wing academic, the journalists, the priests of progress, so to speak, would still see the Anglo-American democratic tradition as being systematically Orwellian, even if it's because there isn't enough redistribution of wealth, there isn't enough social justice. You may hear things like capitalism is systematically devolving into this dystopia where the prison-industrial complex has transformed into a giant slave plantation, a privatized gulag, if you will, and so on. So when thinking about the left's views on liberal democracy, the lyric from the far left band Rage Against the Machine that describes the polls as closing like a casket comes to mind. But either way, this could be why the conservative is prone to saying politics is downstream from culture, because it is a way around the suggestion that the current clown world, transgendered rainbow nations we have today are the result of a long process of liberalization dating back before even the American Revolution. It is a way of saying, if people didn't revolt against the liberal political system we envisioned and instated that we killed kings for, then everything would be fine. It's a way of saying our system didn't fail, the people changed. However, I can imagine the moderate liberals, the libertarian conservative types, sitting there wondering how on earth could you say that about democracy? There are no internment camps, the media is free, and if we don't like a politician, we can just vote them out. But yet, if you contrast any 2 years in, say, America's history, the more recent one will always harbor more left-wing attitudes, policies, institutions, and so on. So is it the case that the culture is just always evolving leftward? Is there this continuous conscious realization by the herd, by the electorate, shifting the culture uniformly in one direction and consequently pushing the polity leftward? Or maybe the spread of the ideas are selected by interactions between unsecure, competing power centers, Times Square and the Pentagon, Hollywood and the White House, and so on. I've made many videos already highlighting these battles for power before, including one of my last videos on bio-Leninism. I will link them all below, but to revisit, Bertrand de Jouvenel brings us this idea of the high-low versus the middle, which gives us the constitution for understanding the left and the right, where others who use these terms are unable to explain them. Low, high, and middle just being words to denote classes in society by capital, political rights, property, and etc. And the first emergence of the high-low versus the middle strategy being between the middle aristocracy and the high monarchy, as it were. But it tends to reassert itself wherever power is decentralized and the polity has multiple competing power centers. How things have played out in today's society, we have the political left that is comprised of the low and the high, minorities, LGBT, the poor, and corporations, the media, academia, and etc. Now, the right, in contrast, is the middle, the white working class, and the lower, less wealthy bourgeoisie, the politically unconnected business owners, and so on. But the middle is less secure. Over time, it gradually loses ground to the low. It deteriorates as the high uses the low as a battering ram against it. Now, why does it do that? To ensure loyalty and to enable itself as a more coherent political class. It's, in short, to give free stuff, political power, and so on in exchange for votes, at least for the time being. Now, the most well-read reactionaries will know that this is further down the line in the genealogy of these things. There are others, such as Imperius, who highlights Adam Katz's view that the current left wing is the result of a fear of what is known in generative anthropology as originary mistakenness, being bureaucratized and hence solidified in the metaphysic, which in hand means notions such as white guilt, the Whig view of history, and so on, are the result of a confused linguistic system that can be solved by acknowledging this originary mistakenness. Now, this would just go over anyone's head that doesn't read generative anthropology, but I bring it up to illustrate that people like Adam Katz over at GA Blog add a lot of nuance to power theory in suggesting, in contrary to the desacralized power theorists, the Machiavelli types, that instead of traditional society being absolute because it had nailed down the right political system, these societies were absolute because the imperatives were less congested. It offers a sacral understanding of power, so to speak. Now, a good example of how this plays out historically would be the emergence of Parliament, of the same Lockean liberalism that conservatives defend. Their values, their culture, if you will, is also the product of power. It is downstream from politics. The blog Reactionary Future has an excellent article on the English political conflict between Tories and Whigs entitled Locke versus Filmer, or Why You Are All Communists. I'll link it in the description. But here Reactionary Future writes, quote, "In the first instance, we have the Tory conception, which was expressed by Filmer. Now, Filmer's concept of property has been dismissed ad nauseum for being based on biblical grounds, unlike Locke's, which were based on biblical grounds. But there's a difference in that Locke's ideas were developed in service to the Whigs' position in society, and they won. So there is that. Why were Locke's positions popular with the Whigs, whilst Filmer's were popular with the Tory loyalists? Locke's position was one supportive of rebellion, anarchism, and oligarchy, which is what the Whigs were about. We can really consider this as a case of two power centers forming two distinct cultures based on their specific interests, the monarchy versus Parliament. Parliament won." End quote. So Reactionary Future is saying that Locke is completely without basis. His whole work is predicated on a state of nature that is a complete abstraction, never having had existed. His labor theory of property and his idea that the individual exists outside of society and independently enters it is absurd. In fact, on a side note, you would have to be a Lockean to think politics is downstream from culture, as the very notion of politics emerging from culture assumes that people enter into society from some pre-existing anarchic or pre-political culture, which of course is a fiction. But where Locke doesn't fail is in his usefulness as a weapon against absolutism. The individualist in this sense is, as Reactionary Future puts it, the foot soldier of the modern state. I mean, individualism reduces everyone to an atomized individual except the democratic state. When you hear Sargon and all these guys give their opinion on liberalism, on individualism, the one exception is always the modern parliamentary state. And a Reactionary Future goes on to say that this exception is a contradiction, a necessary contradiction that highlights Locke's popularity is in step with the success of the Whigs. So guys, the point being, what motivates liberal culture is politics, is the battle of the high-low versus the middle, and not the other way around. It is this cathedral, all the institutions that bring people through them and change them, that creates leftism. As Moldbug said, Cthulhu may swim slowly, but he always swims left. But anyway guys, that's going to have to do it for this one. I thought I'd upload a quick video on some basic neo-reactionary ideas because I've just gone back to university this week, while also I was staffed at the Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux event, so I've been very busy, haven't been able to upload anything onto the channel, so I thought I'd just quickly make this video. And that being said guys, if you liked this, go check out my social media, all the links are in the description. I got my Twitter, my Instagram, it's all good fun there, and have a good one.